Tonight, it's all about fellowship. Fellowship. It's such a powerful thing that God has given unto us to edify us, to strengthen us, to give us hope for the future and strength in the present. Tonight, we're going to be in Psalm 1 to start us off. So, if you would please turn to Psalm chapter 1. Alright, Psalm chapter 1, starting at verse 1. We're going to read all of Psalm 1 tonight. It says, "Blessed is the man that walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the way of the sinners, nor sits in the seat of the scornful. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law does he meditate day and night. And he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of the water, that brings forth his fruit in his season. His leaf also shall not wither. Whatsoever he does shall prosper. The ungodly are not so, but are like the chaff which the wind drives away. Therefore the ungodly shall not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the ungodly shall perish." The world is full of sage advice. It's false wisdom. Truly, the prince of this world, that is, the spirit of the Antichrist, has learned a few things about how God designed humanity and the world that we live in. He likes to take the things that are good and just put a slight twist on there. So you lose sight of where wisdom comes from. You lose sight of these good-natured things. The world is littered with wise sayings that have the truth but disguised. It's pointed in the wrong direction. Tell me if you've heard this before. You are the sum of who you surround yourself with. Alright? The people you surround yourself with influence your behaviors, so choose your friends who have healthy habits. Even more, we've got some that say, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. And this one gets a little more to the point. Wealthy people surround themselves with wealthier people. Right? So it starts off innocent, you're around those that are good for you, that influence you to good things, but then it starts pointing you more towards these worldly things. Alright? And I'm not saying wealth is a bad thing at all. Wealth, when used properly to honor God, is great. Success, when used properly to honor God, is fantastic. You see, David and Solomon gave the original seeds behind this wisdom. Here in Psalm 1, we see it, right? Beware of those who you spend time with. He says, blessed is the man that doesn't walk in counsel with the ungodly. Right? So let's tease out the absolute truth that is given here by David. This psalm, personally, I think is really unique. It's unusual. It sounds more like a proverb than a psalm. But it's the first psalm that we have presented to us. The psalm is such a powerful song, or would have been a word that was used to praise in the temple, because it gives you a way to start remembering the wisdom of God, the truth and advice that God has given to you through David here. It begins with a powerful declaration that would not be able to be denied by anyone. And it reminds you, from the beginning, blessed is the man. Blessed. Ends in ED, which means it's already there. The blessing has already happened. Blessed is the man. And make no mistake, it's not just man as in the male, but this is mankind, humanity, anyone. Blessed is the person who follows these things. Alright, so there's no denying this fact that if you are following the wisdom in here, you're already blessed. The world agrees with it, but it's not going to tell you to follow God with it. It's just going to say, you're going to do good if you're around good people. And it tries to hide that part where it says, ungodly. Ooh. Right? But here's what it says. It says, blessed is the one who does these things. 6 things it tells you to do. Well, really 3 things not to do and 3 things to do. So it stands out to me that he starts with what you ought not to do. He says, walk not in the counsel of the ungodly. The very first thing to be blessed here, David says, is not walk with those who are perverted. Right? Don't walk with those who are going to do those unhealthy things. And then he says, you stand not with the sinners. Right? You can't be living your life idly by standing by, watching those who commit sin and letting them pull you further to the side. The third thing he says not to do is you can't sit with the scornful. All right, so maybe you're on the sidelines. Maybe you're in the office. And you're sitting there. And then the gossip comes out. Ooh. You start judging those people. Like, oh, I don't even know this person, but I ain't it. Because you're poisoning your mind to start seeking that. Right? It's 3 things off the top. Just don't do them. And if you walk away from those things, he then says, these are the things you ought to do. You're supposed to delight in the law. Right? Have joy when you hear God's word preached to you, when you hear correction. Right? Because God corrects those he loves, right? Because we are his children, he wants us to raise up and do the things that are good. And there is no good besides God. So, the second thing he tells us to do is meditate on the law daily and nightly. You should never cease. Right? And I always get a funny look when I say you ought to meditate. Because people are like, that sounds very vague and very Eastern. But no, it's a godly thing. It's a thing that's told to us to do. See, the world will tell you that when you meditate, you ought to clear your mind and let just the world kind of speak to you, but that's not what God says you ought to do. It's not what David says you ought to do. He says, instead, you ought to fill your mind with God's word. Fill your mind and delight in the law. Because you can't do the things that God's asked you to do if you aren't focused on the things that he's already said. Lastly, he says that your faith will be firm, like a tree. He stands upright like a tree. You aren't moved. You aren't shaken. You're confident. Confident. You're going to stand by no matter what this world throws at you. And how do we get that confidence? Where does that confidence come from? From our trusting in God. And you'll trust in God more when you begin to meditate on his law. And you take delight in his word. See how it all builds together out here. Right, so we see all these things. We avoid the things that take us away from God and do the things that bring us closer to him. There is no shortage in this world of preaching that you ought to do the things that aren't of God. Right? It says, go ahead, have fun, go gamble, go drink, go do all these other things that aren't good with your time. Go play another round of golf with your friends. Go out there and do anything else. But come right here. You see, he intentionally gives you these things to do. Go to that sports game that's always on Sunday, that you know is on Sunday. Go celebrate with your friends. Right? Because he knows that fellowship that you get, that fulfillment that you get from friends, was meant to push you towards God. But if your friends aren't seeking God, then you're not going to seek God either. So the deceiver knows what we like. I like to feel praise from my friends for going out and doing something silly. Right? I go out and I do some crazy stunt, and they're all like, yeah, do it again! And next time I go out, break my leg. Right? But God says you ought to be surrounding yourselves with those people who are going to encourage you to come here, to go into the house of your brother and help them, feed them, build up their belongings, right? Encourage them to study. But instead, we're so often, so easily pushed away from the things of God.
And that's where the reminder comes in over and over in this psalm. As Earl will tell you, to constantly surround yourself with the wealthy, the successful, popular, charismatic. They teach you to make idols of your company and those around you. Telling you to choose those who only support your goals. And sometimes you need to be told your goals are the wrong thing. Too often we idolize our own path in life and we forget that God has placed people in our way to let us know what we've done is wrong. The world will quickly tell you, aim for you, and leave you behind. But I'm here to tell you that God has placed those people in your ways sometimes to encourage you to look at and remember that God created you, also created you with purpose. Do not let this world make you believe that success and wealth. Do not let me make you believe that success and wealth are inherently bad. It is the unhealthy pursuit of those things that is sinful. And by letting yourself be around those people, I will say this. And this is kind of the main point before we actually dive into the main sermon here. All of this kind of prevalent to get into this. I will tell you this, that if you can show me your company, I will show you the state of your soul. Those people you surround yourself with day and night, those people that you listen to on social media, the people that you talk to every day, they will color your soul. They will determine your relationship with God. Dr. Debbie Steele says this, how we connect with others colors our relationship with God. The very nature of your relationships shows you how well you are connected with God. If your relationships are constantly about the latest sports fan, the latest trend, if they're constantly about other things and not about God, and guess where your soul is focused? This is not just for God, this is for me too. It is very easy to be taken away by the things of this world because they just keep coming. And that's why we need each other. You see, how does your relationship with others paint this picture of connection with God? Proverbs chapter 1, go ahead and turn there, teaches us that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Furthermore, in Proverbs, we are warned likewise to choose our company wisely. So in Proverbs chapter 1, starting in verse 10, he says this, my son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. But if they say, come with us, and let us lie in wait to shed blood, let us lurk secretly for the innocent without cause. Let us swallow them alive with shield and whole, like those who go down into the pit. We shall find all kinds of precious possessions. We shall fill our houses with spoil. Cast in your lot among us. Let us all have one purse. My son, do not walk in the way with them. Keep your foot from their path, for their feet run to evil. And they make haste to shed blood. Surely in vain the net is spread in the sight of any bird. But they lie in wait for their own blood. They lurk secretly for their own lives. So are the ways of everyone who is greedy for gain. It takes away the life of its owners. Those people who are always out there to win, to take advantage of others, to put their own success first, are sowing the seeds of their own destruction. He says that their end, their goals, their greed, takes away their own life. You see, when we follow people who are following those same things, or we're just associating with them, or we're just like, they're kind of cool to hang around sometimes, we're still letting our soul be pulled into that. We still let ourselves be influenced by that. Your mind is constantly seeking, constantly yearning to worship. We have to remember we ought to worship God alone. If you're not willing to obey and follow simple things that are said here, from God's wisdom that He gave Solomon, then it shows you're not truly loving God. Right? We just talked about that you ought to meditate day and night on His law. This is His wisdom, right, which gives us the whole intent that we ought to do better. And we can't sit here and focus and do right on that simple thing, or it's not hanging out with evil people, the people that we know are doing wrong. Then what does that say about how much you fear God and His correction? It says you don't care. And it's hard to think in the face, because I know there's plenty of people in my life that I would have to say God to. Yeah, I have been slowly working on. And it's hard, it's difficult. We create connections with people, often over a lifetime. But we have to realize that we have to be about our Father's business. There's no way around it. In John 15, we get to see God's instructions for us directly. Not hidden, just plain. In John chapter 15, starting in verse 9, he says this so plainly that we can hear him. It says, "As the Father loved me, I also have loved you. Abide in my love." Listen here. "If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I kept my Father's commandments and abide in His love. These things I have spoken to you, that my joy may remain in you, and that your joy may be full. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you." So, continuing on here, if we ought to be doing fellowship of light, and seeking the good counsel, good wisdom, then we ought to be those who are doing the same thing, loving God and abiding in His commandments. Right? Because if we fear God, then we would obey God. And if we love God, then we obey God. Two ways to look at it. Psalm teaches us, Proverbs teaches us that the fear is gaining wisdom. And Christ tells us that you ought to love. Because you serve Him out of love. You obey Him out of fear. But if you want to cross that line and deepen your relationship, you need to start seeking to love God. Fear, respect Him, absolutely. But love Him and obey His commandments. And seek those who are going to do the same thing. Ecclesiastes chapter 4 is going to teach us more about this. We're going to get deeper here. We're going to see the image of what this looks like. Ecclesiastes chapter 4. Go ahead and turn there. We're going to be in Ecclesiastes chapter 4 kind of the rest of this evening. Ecclesiastes chapter 4 teaches us the importance of not standing alone. You are not made to be alone. In the beginning, God made man after everything. He created light, He said it was good. He created the earth, He said it was good. He saw man and said it was not good for him to be alone. Always interesting. You read through the creation story. God has everything made. He makes man, and He goes, you know what? You need someone. So He makes Adam, Eve, and He makes him good company, good fellowship, to be helpmates, to work with one another. Ecclesiastes chapter 4, starting in verse 7, it says this: "Then I returned, and I saw vanity under the sun. There is one alone, without a companion. He has neither son nor brother, yet there is no end to his labors. Nor is his eyes satisfied with riches, but he never asks, for whom do I toil and deprive myself of good? This also is vanity and a grave misfortune. Two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, one will lift up his companion. But woe to him who is alone when he falls, for he has no one to help him up. Again, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. Though one may be overpowered by another, two can withstand him, and a threefold cord is not quickly broken." You see, here we get to see multiple ways of God saying you can't be alone. You ought not to be alone. He warns us multiple times, paints the picture over and over again in the scripture, and he says, you need good company. That company needs to be with you. You cannot do this alone. That's why it filled my heart with such excitement to hear a word from him. I love to hear it. You're putting people together to worship God and keep them focused. To hear other things that this church has been doing encourages me. And so you ought to keep going. You ought to build this fellowship and continue in love, in this labor of love. It says there, when the man is alone, he never gets the question asked, why or who do I do this work and deprive myself of all this good for? But when you are with your brother and you are become disheartened, you get to turn to them and say, I just don't know how much it's worth. I don't know if it's worth getting up tomorrow and fixing everything that we've been working on. Your brother is there and your sister is there to encourage you and remind you that tomorrow is worth living because He lives. Our God is alive and He's at work in you today. That's what your brother is there for. You cannot do this alone. It is too easy to be discouraged, to feel alone. This world wants you to feel alone. You cannot claim to stand with God and not stand with God's people. The counsel of the godly holds us up. We're going to be joined together and we will not fall. The beauty of the church is this. We get to see God's love lived out by His people. By you, and everyone here. He made you, gave you power, and that gift is not for yourself, but for someone else in this room, for someone else in this room. He has given each of us unique spiritual gifts that we ought not to serve for ourselves, but we ought to serve each other. People ask, where is God today? He said that my spirit is in you and empowering you to do my work. He says to come and follow Him. Take up the yoke with me, that we may work side by side. That we ought to pray that He Father would send harvesters out to work. We are to be together and not alone in that field. He said the laborers are few, the harvest is plenty. And after harvest, it's a lot easier. My brother's right beside me over there. You see, there's this, I got this picture, I think, as we were reading on. Someone else told me of these horses, Belgian draft horses. One by themselves will pull about 4,000 pounds when they're harnessed. It's a lot of weight. But you see, when you put another Belgian draft horse beside them, those two horses will pull 20 to 24,000 pounds together. When alone, they can only pull 4,000. That is what God does when you work with each other, when we work with one another. We are ought to be joined in the work of God as He multiplies the fruit. He multiplies it. You read the story of the early church in Acts, how they lived together and dwelt together and gave us according to everyone had need. And He said He multiplied the numbers daily. Daily. We ought to continually search for one another and lift up each other and give each other that hope. See, the flip side of that is this, and what the rest of Psalm 1 tells us about. Continuing on in verse 13 of Ecclesiastes chapter 4 says this: better a poor and wise youth than an old and foolish king, who will be admonished no more. For he comes out of prison to be king, although he was born poor in his kingdom. I saw all the living who walk with the sun. They are with youth. A second youth who stands in his place. There was no end of all the people over whom he was made king, Yet those who came after her will not rejoice in her. Surely this is also vanity and grasping for wind. What good is it to be ruler of those who care nothing about you? What good is all the wealth in this world if you lost the true king? What good is it to gain the whole world and lose your soul? See, Psalm 1 tells us that it is a blessing to walk day and night with those who love God. And I'm here to tell you, just coming back and seeing each other and seeing how we're working together encouraged me, gave me hope to see how you greet each other. I want to talk about it. It gives me hope to know that it is always worth the cost. God has made us to work together, so do not try to do it on your own what God has told you to do together. God said that his people should be known by their love. That we would be known for working together. When Christ was speaking and he created the garden, he said, Lord, I pray that they may be one as you and I are one. So today, I want you to realize this, that God has been teaching us for millennia to come together